reading off who's here. Why is it going to matter? We're reading off who's here. You're the secretary to this board. Why would it matter if you read them or I do? I just think it would be cleaner because it seems like I jumbled that up a little bit. Yeah. Okay, it's a little bit past 5:15. If we can, we'll go ahead and bring this meeting to order. This is the September 14th meeting of the Jefferson City Planning and Zoning Commission. My name is Chris Jordan, and I am the chairman of this commission. I would like to remind all the commission members, people in the audience, to please silence all your electronic devices, as well as for those of us that are up here at the podium to please remember to turn on your microphones when you are speaking so that people in the audience can hear us as well as it is being recorded. With that, we will start with our council liaison. We will let her introduce ourselves and we'll go around the room.
I'm Erin Wiseman, 3rd Ward Councilwoman.
Michelle Mahoney.
Mike Lester.
Bob George.
David Nunn.
Ann Strotman, City Staff.
Chris Yarnell.
Blake Marcus.
Matt Hall.
Alex Rotenberry, City Staff.
Eric Barron, City Staff.
Sonny Sanders, City Staff.
Thank you.
It's still not working.
The city code authorizes 9 regular members and 3 alternates. Alternates are designated to vote upon the absence or disqualification of regular members. A quorum of 5 members or alternates is necessary to discuss business. I believe we are going to have a quorum tonight, and the following regular members are absent this evening.
Bunny Tricky Cotton, Jack Deaton, Dean Dutoy, and Dale Vaughn.
Okay. Is there any members here tonight that will be disqualifying themselves on any of the items we have? Seeing none. The voting members are as follows.
Bob George, Michael Lester, David Nunn, Chris Yarnell, Blake Marcus, Matthew Hall, and Michelle Mahoney.
And is Dale Vaughn a maybe?
He said he was going to be here, but he isn't.
Okay.
And if he does show up, then nah.
Okay. The only agenda item we have this evening is, I guess it really doesn't have an official number. We're going to call it agenda item 6A, which is the discussion of the zoning code amendment pertaining to short-term rentals. And I know the city staff is working on that, so we know they'll be here to present that.
That's correct. It does not have any kind of formal vote associated with it, so the establishment of the quorum and voting is really only for the adoption of the minutes and approval of the agenda. There's no other items to vote on tonight.
Very good. Thank you, Eric. With that, we do need an adoption of the agenda, so I will entertain a motion. We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. We have the minutes from the regular meeting of August 10th. Ms. Ann has provided those to us. And is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And once we are ready, we will entertain a motion.
I would move we approve the meeting minutes from August 10th of 2017.
Second that motion.
Motion is second. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Staff has indicated we have not received any communication regarding the agenda item tonight, so we'll move on to new business, which is the discussion of the zoning code pertaining to short-term rentals. Eric.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, so this item comes to you actually from the Administration Committee, a committee of the City Council. Was brought to their attention as a lodging item that's taking place in Jefferson City and outside and in other communities. Kind of a growing trend of people offering their homes or even portions of single rooms within their homes up for rent, and to basically in a commercial manner. So the zoning code as it's written right now does not permit that type of use in many districts, especially the single-family residential districts where much of that activity is kind of trending toward. So people offering their home up for rent on websites and such is not a permitted use of a single-family zoning district. That's a commercial type of use. It is notable that many bed and breakfasts and even hotels might offer units up for rent on websites such as Airbnb or BRNO. BRBO, thank you, Dale. BRBO. And so it's a growing trend that's being used not only by people already in the industry, the bed and breakfast, the hotels, but also by single-family homeowners, whether they live in the residence or whether it's an investment property or rental property of some sort. And so it is an item that the administration committee thought needed to be addressed. City staff drafted an ordinance or a council bill to address this issue, to basically allow it with many conditions and with a special permit process associated with it, depending on the zoning districts and such. So my goal tonight is to go through the items that are shown up on the screen, to first kind of educate you about what a short-term rental is. There's a very good article within your packet. I believe it's the last 2 or 3 pages of the packet. If you have not had an opportunity to read that, I would probably ask to read it real quick. It should only take a few minutes, and it covers a lot of ground that I'd be unable to verbally. Would that be possible?
Yeah, why don't we take a short minute here and let the commissioners read what you've given us. think all the commissioners look like they've digested what you've given us, Eric, so if you want to proceed.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the article gives a pretty good overview of the issue of what a short-term rental is, of various things to keep in mind when a city might want to regulate that type of use. And so we've gone through and taken examples from other cities. I'll admit it was a little difficult because it's a fairly new topic. So there's not a lot of cities out there that have actually had addressed this topic, at least not cities similar to ours in character. In many cases, it's vacation areas that this tends to be a larger issue. But it is an item for consideration in Jefferson City, and so I wanted to first describe what a short-term rental is, and start by telling you what it is not. And so the second item up there on the list is a short-term rental versus a bed and breakfast. Okay, so a bed and breakfast use is a use that's currently defined by the zoning code, and I've chopped out the definitions from the zoning code and put them up there on the screen. And so, I think most of us know what a bed and breakfast is. The zoning code defines it, splits it between a bed and breakfast home and a bed and breakfast inn, basically on the number of units or rooms that are being rented, with the home being two rooms or less, and the inn being more than two. And the scale being the thing there, and so that it differentiates them on what zoning districts those uses are permitted in. The bed and breakfast home is a fairly uncommon type of use. It's usually the bed and breakfast inn that I think most of us would equate with a typical bed and breakfast. Because usually there's more than two rooms. There's at least four or so. So bed and breakfast with 4 units in certain zoning districts are a permitted use today, and so they would not fall into a short-term rental kind of category. The purpose of the short-term rental is to try to catch things that are less than a bed and breakfast, or might be operating in districts that are not that are more residential in character than the commercial districts where the bed and breakfasts are located. And I'll touch on that a little bit more when I get to some of the recommendations on the actual bill. So the next item is the short-term rental definitions. So within your packet is a draft of the bill. I think the definitions are kind of located toward the end of that bill, and so you want to bring them up first. So the way we're proposing to define a short-term rental is to split it between 2 different types. One is the short-term rental of a residence, where an entire dwelling unit is being rented out. So someone renting out their entire home, or usually an investment property or rental property of some sort, but offering the entire home for rent on a nightly basis. It's defined up to 7 nights or less. So that would be the short-term rental of a residence. And then the separate category of short-term rental of a lodging room would be a single room within a house. Okay, so someone offering up a single bedroom for rent is the main thing that would catch. It'd also catch. I think it's very common to offer like an entire basement, which might have its own fixtures or refrigerator, stove for rent, but is still contained within a single-family house. The next thing I wanted to touch on is some of the trends in Jefferson City. And so anyone can go on to Airbnb and see what is being offered for rent, not only in Jefferson City, but throughout the world. Okay, and so it is a growing trend. I mean, there are a lot of different types of houses or units for rent. Just my own personal research, I've seen everything from someone offering to rent out a boat that they have at a dock for nightly stays, all the way up to of course, beachfront mansions, in other parts of the country. In Jefferson City, the trend is mostly toward some of the single-family residential districts, so people offering houses up for rent by the night, and then also. Skip down to the third bullet point there. Many of those kind of have a focus on history. I'd say about a fourth of them. So if you pull up Airbnb today and type in a date, I think you'll see about a dozen houses in Jefferson City that are being offered for rent. And as I mentioned, this is currently not a permitted use in many of those districts. So this is an enforcement item for staff to undertake. But we are pursuing an option that would give them a process to pursue to make that a legal use. I think the eclipse raised a lot of awareness of this issue. There was a lot of focus on there being all the hotel rooms renting or selling out within the city, and the need to provide housing, accommodations for out-of-town guests. And so a lot of people, I think, put their houses up or possibly even rooms for the eclipse. That is now over. There's still a few out there that are advertising to rent for the eclipse. Okay, it's incredibly easy. It literally, I think just in a matter of minutes you can place your house onto a website such as this. And so the process that we have in place or have proposed, and so I'll just refer to the draft ordinance, and I'd like to go through it briefly. This is not going to work for me. Yeah, if you can pull up, go back there and drive for me. I need the Word document. Just a moment. I think I got mad at the mouse last time, too. Sure.
I know of an area, right, that it's been, and I don't personally maybe don't see anything wrong with it, but occasionally there's one residence, and I go by it all the time, it's close to my place, and it's residence, and they have a huge motorhome. They park in front of, on the street, in front of the property. They run a cord out to it, they put their awning out, they put the jacks up, and they'll stay there sometimes 4 or 5 days. I've never kept track of it, I just notice it when I go by it. It's there. And if I'm not the, I wouldn't be the, I'd be the last one to complain about it. But anyway, I just wonder if somebody complained what that would amount to.
Mr. George, you're in a public meeting complaining about it.
I know. I know.
No, that is, so using a motorhome or camper or
Right.
anything of that sort as a, staying in it overnight is not permitted by the
Not
city
permitted.
code. Not permitted.
That's what I thought. They
And,
run a cord from the house. I mean, and it's a nice area. I was surprised. And occasionally they come out. They come back occasionally. Maybe once every 4 to 5 weeks. They'll be there, and it'll be a few days, and next thing you know, they're gone. But I just wondered if somebody complained to you all about it. I'm not complaining, but that maybe you all had got a complaint on it.
That is an item that does come up with it's actually a code enforcement type of issue, and so
Okay.
that I would direct anyone who has that type of issue to the code enforcement officers who do respond to such things on a regular basis, and so yes.
Bob, are you trying to put your camper on Airbnb?
Do what?
Are you trying to put your camper on Airbnb?
Yeah.
Yeah. Asking for a friend type scenario?
Yeah, right.
All right, Eric,
Okay.
are you ready to proceed?
Yes, so this is the draft bill. So this is the item, was presented to the administration committee. They voted to forward it to planning and zoning, as it is a land use item. So this is the proper body for it. So we've put this together. I really kind of skipping ahead to the end. And so we would actually place this as a special exception use in every zoning district, meaning that a property owner would have to apply for and receive a special exception permit to conduct this type of use in every district. I do have a change for the Planning and Zoning Commission to consider toward the end of my presentation, but that's how it was originally drafted and presented to the Administration Committee. So it would mean anyone wanting to pursue this type of use coming in front of the Planning and Zoning Commission in a public hearing format, and then on to the City Council, very similar to any other type of zoning case that comes before this body. Planning and Zoning recommending, and then the City Council ultimately being the approving authority. Okay. In addition to that, yes.
On that, are there any districts currently where where these are allowed, or is it just single family?
And so, and I was going to get to that, but I will answer your question. I mean, there, currently commercial districts, if you're operating a hotel or a bed and breakfast, then you're already a permitted use. And so it's not so much of whether this specific use is not defined right now. So no, it's not permitted anywhere. But bed and breakfasts are, and hotels are. And so if you fall into that category, then yeah, it's permitted. And this wouldn't necessarily change that.
Right. But you'd be subject to the same city regulations and ordinances that are in effect for bed and breakfasts and
Yes.
short-term lodging. Okay.
Eric, and you may get into this, but with the special exception permit for all of the districts, and you say you might modify that, I have two quick questions. One is, how long would that process take for an applicant to come meet city staff, start the process, come see us? I'm assuming then it would go to City Council?
Yes. So
If you
where
had to guess right now, is that a 3-month process?
it's typically a 3-month. If you add in some of the upfront discussion, 4 months or so. Where it takes 10 minutes to advertise a home online, and it could take 4 months to get through the city process.
Then my next question, and I'm sure we'll going forward, I'll address that, but with having a special exception permit required, is that similar to a rezoning where notification with 185 feet would go to all the property owners along
Yes.
185 feet?
And that's the primary goal of the process is to get the public input from the surrounding property owners. And so that's the reason why it stretches out to that sort of length.
Okay.
So.
I'll let you continue.
Could I have another question, please? Okay. Is this going to affect that property that I'm going to call it what we approved here a couple of months ago out on Old Loman Road? And that's going to be the special housing. Is this going to affect that any at all?
No. Two different categories there.
Okay.
So.
Okay.
So the draft bill, as I mentioned, would put it as a special exception permit use in every zoning district, and then would have specific use standards tied to it. So specific use standards is that area of the zoning code that attaches specific regulations to uses that are because of their character, might need some specific requirements attached to them, and so. It starts with item B in the bill, and goes through. And the very first one is probably the most important. And this is a requirement that the special exception permit would be issued in the name of the property owner and is non-transferable. Okay, so you could not get this approved for your property then sell it. And what that also allows is for whoever is applying for that permit, the property owner, with them being the one being issued that permit, if they have past code enforcement violations or other matters that might be relevant, to whether allowing a special exception permit, in their name to really be something. It allows for some of those issues of character to be relevant before this body and the city council. And kind of continuing on, would not allow them to take place in garages or other things, so you couldn't rent out a garage or a second unit on your property. Number 3, that there'd be limits on the number of people that could be housed within it, basically tying it either to the definition of a family for a single-family home. And
So, Eric?
Yes.
Just wanted to mention that two properties I know that use Airbnb, neither one of them are in Jefferson City, but one of them is basically an apartment over a garage that's not attached.
Okay.
Another one I know of is a tiny house behind the residence.
Okay.
So I'm just mentioning that
Yep.
the tiny house is it's in St. Louis, but
So neither one of those would be, a residence or really, occupiable, for that purpose, in Jeff City, for a couple different reasons. And so I just want to be, clear with this to make sure that it's not, a garage or Mr. George's RV that is being rented out. You can't do that. It's got to be part of the residence, and so. But yeah, I do. I mean, it's meant to prevent exactly that, and so. It creates a second unit on the property in what is usually a single-family type of issue. Okay. So most of this is really meant to address, short-term rentals in single-family districts. Yeah, I mean, we kind of have to address it in all districts at the same time, but the primary focus, most of what is taking place in the single-family residential districts. If it's taking place in commercial districts, it's kind of a different issue, and it might actually be a permitted use because of the bed and breakfast type of use. And so having a second unit on a single-family property is not permitted by code. So.
Eric, it seems to me the major distinctions there is in this that you're creating here. It's it's a room or the house that's normally a residence. In those other cases, those structures are pretty much that's the only use they're used for. Is that?
Yeah, I think so.
Correct.
And there's another item I'll get to that they would have to meet any applicable building code and fire code requirements. So it could be that those residents being offered for rent wouldn't pass that hurdle either, or those a garage or something being offered for rent. So does that answer your comment? Okay. We have a signage thing in there, basically tying the signage to the same that's allowed for a home occupation, a single 1 square foot sign so that people know they're in the right spot. Number 5, that the property cannot be rented or used for receptions, parties, or weddings or any big gatherings, obviously to keep it from being a party spot. Number 6, an item on parking, basically requiring an extra parking space if it's a single room being rented out. So now you have a residence plus an extra car, and then if it's just the whole home being rented out, then there would be no change in the parking requirement, just the regular requirement. The length of stay is just kind of a reference to the 7-day type of stay. Once you go above 7 days, you would actually fall into a category of not being a short-term rental. And so you'd basically fall into a normal residential category, a long-term residence, basically.
Continuous 7 days or 7 days total within a month?
7 consecutive nights. So, yeah. So once you hit that 8th consecutive night, you're really into being a residence. So if someone's looking to rent an apartment, for 2 or 3 weeks or something, that's really a residential use. They're living there. So.
Okay, let me ask you: is the property owner? Do they have to contact the city and inform you that they're renting this property, and then you all have to go out and inspect it, or?
I was going to get to that.
You're going to get to that.
I was going to get to that. Yep.
Very good.
Okay. have to maintain a residential appearance. Obviously, don't want to turn it into a commercial property. And then the last three items there, C, D, and E, actually making C is more of a recommendation of the law department, saying that simply advertising a unit on a website or something that does not have the applicable permit, special exception permit, would be a violation. So that's an enforcement clause. D is that they would be subject to all applicable taxes, including lodging taxes, sales tax, business licensing regulations. And so I think that answers Mr. George's question, that if they're required to get a business license, then yes, that's what they would have to do. I don't necessarily want the zoning code saying that they have to get a business license. We have a different chapter of the city code dealing with that, and it could be that some changes need to be made to that. The finance department is aware of that. That's they're kind of responsible for administering that type of action. But I believe the answer would be yes, that they would have to have some sort of business license, or at least I think that's what they're pursuing. In the event they come to a conclusion that they don't need a business license, then the answer would be no, I think. But surely we would have to look at something there. So. And then the other one, the last item, that be subject to any fire code and building code inspection requirements. And so every building's subject to fire and building code. This is just a reminder that this is something that needs to be considered by anyone wanting to pursue this. Should the inspection processes of the building regulations division or the fire department, support actual inspections of these residences before they start using them, then yes, they would have to be inspected. The same as any other business has to be inspected because of those requirements. And so I would suspect that there will be a business licensing requirement along with a inspection process. Alex, can you get me back to the PowerPoint? Oh. Okay, so that was the draft ordinance. I wanted to mention one possible change to the ordinance, and that is, as we've alluded to a couple times, is maybe actually considering these things to be a permitted use within certain the commercial districts, basically. So up on the screen, I know it's kind of small print, but I've taken the excerpt of bed and breakfast homes and bed and breakfast inns out of the land use matrix to show you which districts they are a permitted or conditional use. And then the blue circle up there is really the highlight of what I wanted to point out, is that the bed and breakfast inn, the one that's more common, that's more than 2 units within a bed and breakfast, is a permitted use of all 4 commercial zoning districts, and also the new mixed use district, which is currently limited to Capitol Avenue area, but will in time be used elsewhere in the city. But anyway, so that bed and breakfast use is already permitted within those districts, and so the thought is to why have a special exception process associated with those specific districts when you can already do things like bed and breakfasts. And so here on the lower part there is the excerpt from the bill for those 2 categories, the short-term rental of a residence, the entire home, and the short-term rental of a lodging room. Okay. Now, out of those 2, the short-term rental of a lodging room, I would suspect would be rather rare, as compared to people wanting to rent an entire residence. It's kind of rare to offer or want to rent a single room within a residence, but would still take place. But the category of renting the entire residence, really the thought here is whether to identify it as a permitted use within those 5 zoning districts that are circled. And so I'm curious what the Planning and Zoning Commission thinks on this matter. I mean, if that's something that is logical or not. What it would do, just a few items to point out, is in the commercial districts, including the downtown district, it would allow any residence that exists, whether it be a non-conforming or a loft apartment or an apartment building that happens to be located in a commercial zone, it would allow it to be rented, every unit within it, out on websites such as Airbnb. Also, it would remove that special exception requirement, meaning that a lot of the different conditions would still apply, but the one requiring that the special exception permit be issued in the name of the owner would disappear. So there would be no kind of review of the character of an owner when deciding on these matters. Any thoughts?
I guess my overall concern with this would be, and it may be that all works out through this, and I've just kind of missed it, would be so that you don't end up with somebody that continually rents a residence 365 days a year, but to different people for a week at a time. Is that going to be possible?
Yes.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yep.
And that would concern me simply from the standpoint of the value for other residences in that immediate vicinity or in that neighborhood. And I don't know if there'd be some way we could maybe make a limit on the number of nights they could do in either a month or a year. But to me, that would be similar to, you see neighborhoods that not always, but a lot of times tend to decline when you notice that all of a sudden there are a lot of rental houses in amongst owner-occupied dwellings, and that tends to kind of note that the area is going down, and this might have that same effect.
And so that was one of the items within the reading, was one recommendation to limit the number of nights. We did not include that in the draft bill for I think probably a couple of reasons. One of them being is that it would be very difficult to keep track of or enforce. I do not know how we would do that from a staff level. It would be very complex. We'd basically rely on them to keep track of it and have to require regular reports or something. And so I think that's the primary reason not to. And the secondary reason is that it would be a limit on that, and whereas the property owner obviously would want to to have it available all the time, but it is a possibility to incorporate something like that into it.
Yeah, and
It'd
I
just
can
be very
certainly see
complex.
exactly what you're saying, that somebody that wants to do that's probably going to want to do it on a pretty regular basis. And I don't guess really there's no way with a business license to regulate it, is there? The number of nights that they'd be able to.
Again, I think it would be possible, maybe even from a business license perspective, but it would be very complex, and it would be out of the ordinary. Nothing really comes to mind that would be similar to that we do right now. Regulating a business on how often they use something. So,
Do you know, since I know you looked at other cities, do you know if any adverse effect on area values has been experienced because of these kind of things being prevalent or starting to be prevalent in a particular area?
I don't know that my research really went that in depth. I probably would have had a hard time finding anything like that. A lot of it was focused on vacation areas, beach communities, beachfront communities, and Osage Beach has some language that is very useful in looking at. And but no, really, I don't really have a good answer to that question.
And as kind of an example of that, I know at the lake with condominiums, there are condominium developments that will allow overnight rentals, and there are others that don't. And the ones that don't tend, not always, but tend to have higher value.
Really? Yeah.
I can see how Mr. Nunn can see that it causing issues with value, but I also think that it could have a positive impact as well. I know a lot of people that may get more per night than, I know some people, not particularly here, but in like Nashville and San Diego, that they rent their house out over the weekend and it pays, practically their entire month's rent or house payment. So it can benefit and may be able to help people take that money and improve their property. So there could be some positive aspects to it. And then you answered the other question I had about what areas we looked at as far as the language goes that you come up with. Did you all come up with that yourself, or was it parts of Like Columbia, did you look at Columbia and how they did, the way they did it as far as their zoning goes, or their city council goes?
I looked for anything, anywhere I could find information. I don't recall finding much with Columbia, or at least much useful for what I was really working toward. It was mostly areas out of state, and it was long enough ago I can't recall them off the top of my head.
But as far as Columbia goes, did they allow it, or they just don't regulate it?
I'm not sure of the answer to that. I'd have to go back and look. I want to say that it's. I really don't know. I'd have to look.
That's fine.
So.
Yeah. Okay.
Erica, I don't notice anywhere in here where it defines what a residence is. I think that is there another area in the code that defines residence?
Well, we do define a family, and
Well, I think my concern would be that if you're not defining residence, then, does it include,
Okay.
does it mean that the owner has to actually live there? I think that's the traditional definition of your residence.
Okay.
So then if it doesn't include where the owner has to live there, then it wouldn't include, like, people who, then you wouldn't have the chance for somebody to rent out your home for 365 days a year, because at that point it's not a residence. But I don't see residence defined, and I don't see dwelling unit defined. And if that's the case, then if we're applying this to homes that don't have residence for the majority of the year, could these then be applied to hotels, which I could see that being a problem for when you're excluding weddings and receptions and things like that.
Okay, we do define dwelling in the zoning code, and I think we link the definition, both definitions, to that. And so that's the tie. And so no, I would contend that it does not apply to a commercial situation.
Okay. And then
So.
for dwelling, do you know if that has some sort of tie-in for whether or not the owner has to live there or anything like that?
I don't believe that it does. It's really defining the use. So the short-term rental of a residence of the entire building, obviously they wouldn't be living there at least the time they're renting it. Okay. Then the short-term rental of a lodging room it would be limited to a single room. The rental of a portion of a room or within, and so within the code, I have Alex pull it up again. I believe in the text it limits it to a single room, and so you could only rent out one room. You cannot rent out two, and so that's another another bar there that people would not be able to pass. So in that line, either you're renting the whole residence or you're renting a single room and you live in the rest. One might imagine having a single tenant within the building and trying to rent out a separate room. Well, in that case, I think that's getting pretty far out there.
Sure, but there's nothing in the definitions that would prevent a 365-day-a-year rental.
No, if this is passed and inserted into the zoning code, then a person could get a special exception permit and rent out their home on a nightly basis, 365 times a year.
Or multiple properties that they own.
Yes.
Okay.
Person at a time, or up to 7 nights. Yeah.
Up to 7 nights. So it'd
Yep.
be different people every week.
Yep.
For
Right.
Mhm. But it does need to be made very clear that it is, allowing that type of commercial use within, the residential districts, again, with a lot of conditions and with a special permit process, but it would be a commercial use nonetheless.
And then on the enforcement side, let's say somebody rents it out for 14 nights and a neighbor complains and the city goes to enforce it. What happens to the people who have rented it for 14 nights?
Well, once you get above a certain level, and I think we were basically setting that level at seven nights, then you become a long-term resident. And so if, in the same manner as you can rent a house out, on a monthly basis, or maybe a weekly basis now, or 8 night at a time basis.
So you would be able to rent out your house for longer than 7 nights. It's just this statute or this ordinance wouldn't apply to that.
Exactly. Yeah. So once you go above a week, then you fall into not being in the short-term rental category here.
Well, and then removing
Basically,
that
yeah.
from the hypothetical situation, if the homeowner was in violation of this and there's a tenant staying there, a short-term rental tenant staying there, what happens when the city goes to enforce it? In other words, is somebody going to get kicked out of the house that they just rented for 4 nights?
Yeah, I'd probably defer. I think that'd be a case-by-case basis. I mean, in the past, when there's something pending there, then try to work with the issue. But it depends, I think, on the severity of the issue. So.
Eric, I think your verbiage and what you said tonight, that to apply for the special exception, it has to be the owner of the property. It cannot be a tenant. Let's use the example, someone rents a single-family house to someone on a yearly lease. That person thus decides to do this type of scenario. The tenant would not be allowed to apply for the special exception, or could the tenant and the landlord in conjunction do that?
I believe the tenant and the landlord could make that application, on behalf of the tenant, but it would be issued in the landlord's name. And so the landlord would really be the responsible
The accountable
person
party
there, the
if there's
person.
any issues going forward.
Yeah.
But once again, you're saying that if a special exception is approved, then the city staff gets involved with inspecting the property for necessary things for health, safety, welfare, if you want to say. And what I see is, and you brought up earlier, that a lot of people are doing this in this area with historic properties. Well, historic properties, some of them, not all of them, don't meet current code. They might not have special outlets in the bathrooms and kitchens. They might not have the handrails just right. And some of that goes back to the character of those types of property. So therefore, if something's approved, is the city going to go out there and say, well, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, you want to take your 1900 home on East Circle and you want to do this, but you've got to put a handrail here, you've got to change this, you've got to do that, and so on and so forth. Then you're losing maybe some of that character. But do you believe that would be the case? Or is the code officials going to look at the house and say, these health, safety, welfare items are based upon when the home was built?
I believe that the building code has allowances for historic type things within it. I kind of defer to the building official for any detail on that. But I think the short answer is basically that no, it's not necessarily going to require a lot of that type of renovation. They would have to meet, those. I'll refer to them as the basic life safety type issues. Obviously, making sure that the dwelling, where people are sleeping, qualifies as a sleeping quarter, has a window, has two exits. So usually it's a window and a door. Making sure there's smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors, if applicable, things like that. And so. I don't know that it would necessarily have to meet all the qualifications for a commercial structure, but would have to meet whatever the building code and fire code would require.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Eric, and I'm sure I'm missing something here. Is there anything currently that keeps, if I have a rental home, is there anything that keeps me from renting it on a weekly basis? Which would essentially be the same as what we're talking about?
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know that the zoning code has a very clear definition of what a long-term rental situation is, and so that's one issue that's kind of been unearthed with this. I think in the past it's generally been looked at as being 1 month. Okay, and in some of the original drafts of this, we were kind of looking at it being 1 month. For this type of ordinance. Well,
So
maybe
just kind of
7 days is too low. Maybe 1 month is far too high, and maybe there needs to be some sort of thing in the middle there. I don't know what the best answer to that is, but I would think that there's people that charge weekly rents out there today, and so if it's a long-term stay situation, then no, it's not an issue. But I think someone renting their house out today on a weekly basis would be in conflict with the zoning code.
And so whether it's a current rental that somebody already owns, or whether it would be something that would fall under the short-term ordinance, parking and a lot of the other regulatory things that this sets out are already going to be kind of in place anyway, aren't they? Sounds like it.
Yes, I think so.
Other than maybe signage.
Yeah.
Does when someone applies for the permit, do you have to get a separate permit for each property?
Yes.
Okay. What's the cost of the permit?
$210 is current application fee for special exception permit. So.
Okay, is there any other questions by the commissioners at this point for city staff?
Hey,
Please.
Eric, is there a reason we're capping it to 5 people? Say I have a 7-bedroom home.
So it's capped to, let's see. Okay, so a rental of a residence, a maximum of 5 unrelated persons or any number of persons related by blood, marriage, or adoption. That is the same definition as a family in the zoning code. So you'd be able to have the same type of situation as would be allowed in a single-family residence. So if you and your family are renting a home and you have 12 family members, then you're going to be okay under that definition. If you and 11 of your best friends each get together and each take a separate car to the home, and then you will not fall under that definition. You all need to get a hotel.
I thought your second explanation was called a fraternity house.
Yes.
So, yeah. Okay. Once again, is there any other questions for city staff from the commissioners at this point? I'll say it the other way around. Is there any questions for city staff?
One, this is an item that we will notice up for a public hearing at the next meeting. I am curious of any thoughts you have on the one question that I presented to you regarding the listing it as a permitted use, within those commercial districts. If you have any strong opposition to that, or strongly in favor of that, or just kind of neutral. From my perspective, it seems to make a little bit of sense. It would have the effect of making every downtown loft being eligible for this use. It would also have the effect of keeping it out of the special exception permits coming in front of you for areas where the impact is probably far less. Especially Capitol Avenue area, it would keep any houses along that, which might be undergoing any number of other items that they need to consider to revitalize that area. But if they're short-term rental is an option there, then they'd be able to pursue it outside of this body. Have I made a strong enough case for it? I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I'm still kind of trying to get around the difference between somebody advertising a rental property a residential rental property that they already have, and saying we'll rent for 1 week or we'll rent up to a year at a time. Is there something in the existing code that would not allow them to do that 1 week, and that's why we need to do this? Because, and I see that this does add some additional protections that aren't already there. But
okay, I will confer with the law department on that. We'd already kind of recognized it as a whole, in our code. I think I was trying to solve it by bringing that bar down to 7 days, but it could be that we need something in between 7 days and a month, because in general, I would consider a long-term, residence being a stay of at least a month. Anything less than that, you're kind of a short timer.
I can see people trying to circumvent that by saying, what's the difference whether I rent it for a week or a year?
And see, if you're renting it for a year, then you would not need a
Right.
special exception permit.
I'd like to make a comment. I did discuss that with our law department, and that comes down to a proof standard. You'd end up in court arguing with the judge of, is this a week or is it a month? Because I did argue, I said, what happens if somebody does rent it out for a week and doesn't apply under this? How do you know that I didn't rent it out for the whole month, but they only stayed for the week? And the result it turns out to be a proof standard, and the judge has to decide. So that's, I think it means that the prosecutor has to file a complaint, and then the person there's a complaint against has to come in and defend themselves, and the judge gets to decide whether they have violated our short-term rentals or whether it is in fact a long-term rental and falls under landlord-tenant laws of the state of Missouri.
And so I think that Ryan Molman, the city councilor, was trying to address that issue with the one item in there that merely offering the unit for rent on a nightly basis would trigger a violation if you were not had the appropriate permit. And so it's not having to prove that someone stayed there or rented it. It's that you can pull it up and see it offered as being for rent. So
I guess my only comment about this would be that sort of the perception that the people who are, these downtown businesses or loft owners, they've got the ability to pay the $210 for the permit, whereas somebody in a single-family residence may not. And so we're charging the single-family residents this permit application, but we're not charging the people who could readily pay it. And it's only a perception issue in my mind, but that would be my concern.
And in response, I would say that the primary purpose of that process is to get feedback from the surrounding property owners on whether that's an appropriate use for that specific area, and regarding some of the other applicable considerations. And so, the fee goes into that process, where it's just not necessary in the downtown area, perhaps. So. One other small item worth pointing out. Sorry. I neglected to address the two manufacturing districts. I would actually be listing them as special exception areas as well. There's a few houses that are zoned industrial, not very many, but I don't want to leave that open, leave it a hole in the code. But I believe what I would be bringing forward for consideration next month and posting as a public hearing item would be to list it as a permitted use within the oval selected area. And otherwise, I have a few notes here on a few definitions that maybe need to be cleaned up. But other than that, bringing it forward substantially in its same form.
So you will be filling in those two industrial districts with special exceptions or permitted?
A special exception.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. Now, I don't know if anyone else in the audience, might have anything to say. We do list at the top of our agenda that anyone can appear to speak on any item. So,
for the commission members, got everything answered they'd like from Eric at this point? All right. I think Mr. Yarnell needs to step out, so we'll let him go. For those of you in the audience, I would like to remind you that this is not a public hearing tonight. It's more of an informal discussion. Our typical response at this time would be for anyone that wants to come up and speak for or against a case, but this is open. I'll call it open mic night, if you want to say. The commission and city staff would like to hear your comments. We do appreciate you guys being here approximately an hour so far for this meeting. So what we'd like for you to do is our typical time frame is we give 3 minutes to someone to come up and speak about whether they're for or against it, or maybe they're just neutral. But we'd like for you to come forward, state your name and address for the record, and then just let us know what your thoughts are of where city staff is with this and any ideas that you think you might have that would help, draft something that we can move forward with, or may ultimately scratch this idea. So anyway, I'll open that up, so if someone would like to come forward, please state your name and address for the record, and we'll open it up.
Hi, I'm Donna Dietz. I live at 720 East High, and I have a vacation rent by owner property at 712 East High. It's called High Street Retreat. And Eric and I have been working on this, have worked together for a long time, in that we're probably the first and the only one right now that's really like what we're talking about in this particular vein. We are in a commercial zone district. So Eric and I have kind of talked about that piece of it. A couple items that were brought up. If this goes through, couple issues that come up. One is the number of persons. I know you all addressed that, and the number of persons. And it says in here, 5 unrelated persons. Well, I'm in a historic house. It was the first funeral home here in Jefferson City, and we sleep 12 people there easily. Next weekend, I've got Lincoln University sorority coming in. They're not related, and there's going to be 12 women in there. So number of persons would be an issue in that particular case. I've got a whole list of things here. Another one would be, again, looking at it in a commercial area as opposed to a residential area. What takes place there, what's involved, that this particularly calls for not being able to have wedding receptions or meetings or parties or things like that. Again, we're in a commercial district. We don't fall into the bread and breakfast venue because we rent an entire home out rather than separate rooms within a home. We also don't fall into the hotel because, again, we rent one rental for the whole home as opposed to separate units. So it falls into a whole different kind of category in this venue that's going on. As far as the term of stay, again, that would be questionable because we do have people, as example, we have a film crew that may be coming in and staying 10 days while they're doing filming here in Jefferson City. Again, they're not related. They're working on a project. They'll be there 10 days. They won't be there a month. When I started all of this 5 years ago, I went into the city to, number one, get a business license, and we were told because we're a rental, we don't qualify under a business. You're renting out a building, a residential building, people staying there, so it didn't qualify under business license. We didn't qualify for a hotel because we don't qualify in hotel-type rental. We did qualify for the lodging tax, which we've been paying, for the past couple of years that we've done this. So there's a variety of different things that fall into which category each group is being put into, whether it's a single room in a home, whether it's a whole home in a residential district, if it's in a commercial district, how it's being used, and again, numbers would be important to address. If you all have any questions, because we've been doing this for 3.5 years now, very successfully, and we can answer some of those questions for you, some of the things that come up.
How many, what's your average per week or per month of
number of rentals?
Occupied.
We usually do the weekends. Every once in a while we'll go longer. As an example, during the eclipse we had people there for 5 days. I've got another group, this film group, they're talking 7 to 10 days, but usually we just do the weekends. We've got a basketball team coming in, things
usually
like that.
Usually every weekend, though?
It's usually a weekend, sometimes during the week. Just depends on what it is.
How many weekends out of the year have you been?
How many what?
How many weekends out of the year have you been full or
right now,
occupied?
We're at, what did we do this year? I think we've done 20, how many weekends are in a year? 52.
Yeah.
We've done about half of them, or we're booked for about half of them.
Good.
So it just depends on, and again, we've only been doing this for a couple of years, and we are listed on Airbnb, we're listed on VRBO, Booking.com, any place that I can get on to advertise, then we're doing that.
Good. Donna, would a cure for your problem be if the ordinance would address a difference between the numbers you've mentioned, and so the commercial areas would be different than the residential
Well,
areas?
and I think that's one of the reasons that Eric was talking about, listing the commercial a little different, because it is a different type of operation. It is a larger type of operation. However, I also know of somebody who's got a historic house that's in a residential area that they're going to rent the whole thing out, and who knows how many folks they might have. I don't know how you would address that, quite honestly, other than, the size of the house. Some of the historic homes, and what Eric was talking about on Capitol Avenue, you've got homes there that could easily be 12, 15 people, depending on the size of the home.
You mentioned you easily sleep 12 people. Does that mean there's a bed for all 12 people?
We have 4 double beds and 4 twin beds. And actually 2 of them are on the first floor, and they're used basically for an ADA accommodation, so they don't have to go up the stairs. And we quite honestly don't usually have folks that stay in that one, because it is on the first floor where the living room and the dining room and everything else is.
Any other questions for Donna at this point? Thank you for your testimony. Is there anyone else in the audience who would like to come up and speak on this request? If you would, sir, please state your name and address for the record.
Yes, sir. Hi, my name is Trey Probst. I'm the president-elect of the Missouri Hotel and Lodging Association, and I live at 137 North Capistrano Drive here in Jefferson City, Missouri. So I just wanted to make sure that we were all on the same page with some of this stuff. I listened to what Donna said, and she feels like a bed and breakfast to me, but I'd have to take a look at the statute to see, because it sure seems like, well, and that's one thing that I know that the law that's going to be proposed next year is going to address, is the definition of a bed and breakfast, and make sure that it's done properly. But when I was looking at the drafted proposal, it's got some really good things in it. I've been fortunate enough to speak to about 7 different cities on this topic throughout the state. Columbia, for instance, you asked the gentleman, Mr. Vaughn, asked about Columbia. Columbia doesn't have anything right now. They don't want to address anything until the state delivers their law, which is probably going to be next year by everything that we're looking at. And the one thing they are addressing right now, though, is presently they say that it has to be 12 rooms or more in order to tax. They're scaling that back to any room. So 1 room in one house, in a 3-bedroom house, they sell 1 room, it's taxed. So they can capture that lodging tax and capture that sales tax. One thing that when I was looking over the paperwork, the 7 consecutive nights, that tends to worry me a little bit. And the only reason I say that is the state of Missouri determines, I'm sure Ms. Wiseman was kind of alluding to this, that it's 30 consecutive nights for residency. So do we then create a loophole where we're not going to be able to tax anybody at all staying 8 to 29 nights? I don't know. I think that's very possible that that's what we're doing. And even Airbnb says that you get 15% off for staying 7 nights or more, and 40% off for staying 30 days or more. So it's kind of iffy there. But I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have after I point out just a couple of things. One, I know a lot of people, it's easy to list it, and I know you said that, and I think that that's the key, is it's easy to list, it's hard to track and control. How are you going to know, unless there's a complaint, that you have a party of 50 individuals right out, in your neighborhood? Maybe it's just down the street, maybe it's on the street behind you, where that's happening. And until you have a problem, you don't know. The Missouri State Tax Commission, the Missouri Supreme Court in decision in 2004, Shipman versus Dominion Hospitality, said that if you rent a room, rent one of these things out, room or whole house, one time, your property tax assessment should be done as commercial and not residential. That's one thing that a lot of people don't know, that it's supposed to be assessed as commercial in that particular instance. Other than that, I'm sure that I'm going to go through this and kind of take a look at it and see what it addresses and what I think may help you, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. I know there has been some problems in some areas. For instance, I know in Branson there was a huge problem with this particular venture to where they no longer allow it at all. And there's other communities who no longer allow it at all.
Can you give us an example of what issues they had?
Yeah, in Branson there was a house that was rented out. It was a nice house, probably 7-8 bedroom house. It was rented out to some college kids, because you rent that thing over the internet. You don't really meet them. You give them a code. They go in, they push the code in, they get the box just like the realtor box. They pull the key out, they go in the house, they have a good time. So it was rented to a party group, we'll call it, of college kids. They ended up with over 150 kids partying at this place, some of them in college age, some of them in high school. The worst part of it wasn't that all the cars were parked all up and down the road, that all the beer cans were all in the community. The worst part of it was that they shoved things down the toilets, and all of a sudden the entire subdivision's septic system and whatnot was no good. And that's just one instance of something that can happen if these things aren't regulated. And then for you guys here, or for the city, how do they track this? Other than seeing it listed on the website, how do they track how many times it was rented, and at what rate was it rented? What rate was it rented? Did they pay the taxes that are actually due based on the money that they took in? I don't know how you track that right now. That'd be tough to do. May I answer anybody else's questions?
What's the state law that's currently being?
Yeah, for the last 2 years, Expedia, which you may or may not have heard of, Expedia tried to pass a law that would pretty much absolutely remove local control. It would make it where you could not zone these things out at all within your jurisdiction. The Missouri Hotel and Lodging Association, along with the Missouri Insurance Association, the Missouri Bankers Association, well, we've stopped that for 2 years running. But we're coming up with our own law that we hope will satisfy all parties, because this is something that isn't going away. He's exactly right. It isn't going away, and it's going to have to be dealt with at some point, but it needs to be dealt with responsibly and safely. I mean, I don't know if any of you all hear about the human trafficking. This is the places that those things are going to now, because it's unregulated, because there's no one there to say you can't do that. And so that's something else that you need to kind of take into consideration. Methamphetamine creation, it's completely unregulated. There's no one there that can say, hey, you can't do that here. Call the cops on you, unless the owner happens to come by, and I don't know how many owners are going to come by while their place is rented and check on those people and how well that will be received by the people who are actually renting it. Any other questions I could answer for you, or anything else? There is things coming. As far as the state law, I think that you can say that there's going to be a safety aspect to it. There's going to be a regulation aspect to it. There's going to be a business licensing aspect to it, so that they can somehow track where these things are located. But still, tracking the revenue, that's something that we're still struggling with now, sir.
How do the hotel lobbyists, are they in favor of this? I wonder. Well, I didn't think they would be. No.
No, because we have to, when you operate a hotel, and I have the Candlewood Suites Hotel here in town. I don't own it, but I'm the regional manager for it. When you operate a hotel, there's a whole lot of upfront costs and a whole lot of compliance things that you have to come up with to make sure that you are safe, to make sure that your building can handle the waste needs of the guests that are in it, to make sure that there's someone there who is responsible not only for the $10 million facility, but for the lives in it. So we're responsible for all those things as a hotelier. We're not for it because right now, the legislation isn't such where anyone is really wholly responsible. The Missouri Insurance Association is against this. They're going to make sure that it's an exclusion in your property. You won't have insurance if you do this. The Missouri Bankers Association, what happens when you've got a loan on this property and you've told them it's for you to live in, but it's not. It's for your business. It's a business. So, and the other thing I always go back to is no matter what else was done with that property, If I put a restaurant in my house, if I put a gas station pumps outside, no matter what I do, I've got to comply with the law for restaurants, and I've got to comply with the law for gas stations or whatever else it is. And that's kind of the other way that we look at it as a hotel group.
Okay.
Anything else I can answer?
Thank you for your
Thank you, sir.
testimony. Is there any other questions or comments?
I would like to commend the group, though, on everybody's understanding on it. I found that just listening back here, your guys' understanding, the questions that you're asking certainly are the right ones, and I think it's you're ahead in your understanding of some of the other communities that I've had the pleasure to speak in. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to come forward and speak this evening? Okay, I see a lot of shaking heads out there, so I think we'll consider that the testimony tonight is complete.
Mm-hmm.
Do any of the commission members have any comments or questions for city staff with the testimony that we've had so far? Or Eric, if there's nothing from the commission members, where would you like to how would you like to move forward with this for the rest of the evening?
We are planning to bring this forward as a public hearing item, so advertising it for a formal zoning code amendment with a public hearing at the next meeting. That meeting would be on October 12th here in this room, 5:15 p.m. Would likely try to address some of the comments that were made by the commission and public here at this meeting within the draft that would be placed up for the public hearing. Other than that, just any other thoughts or comments would be greatly appreciated.
I have one. I guess I have one question and one comment. Explain to me who the administration committee is. You referenced that earlier. I'm personally not familiar with what that is. Maybe that's a new committee.
Okay.
But tell me who that's made up of and a little bit about that real quick.
And so the administration committee is one of 4 council subcommittees. Each of those committees are made up of 5 members of the council, and so such that each ward is represented with a single member. So each of the 5 wards sit on any of these bodies, and so if I can get them all correct, administration, public safety, public works and planning, and finance are the 4 different bodies. And so a lot of the different functions of the city are divided into those, and they act as kind of a screen for items to come up and get discussed and then brought forward to the city council for formal action. And so in this case, it came up in front of administration because many of the different taxing and other types of issues that are associated with that, but as a land use item was referred to the Planning and Zoning Commission. Councilwoman Erin Wiseman is the chair of that committee, and also happens to be the alternate liaison for the Planning and Zoning Commission. So,
very good. My next comment would be that anyone that's interested in this topic, once again, can contact you or other city staff by phone or email. Go onto the city website, correct?
that is correct. Certainly contact me by telephone and or in person. I'd be happy to discuss with them. And then, of course, as a public hearing item, anyone who has any interest in it can appear at the public hearing next month and testify either in favor, against, or with any other neutral type of stance in front of this body.
Very good. With that being said, do any of the commission members have any comments? Mr.
Just
Dunn?
real quickly, I'd like to say thanks for, there's a lot more work that's in this than just the short 2 pages of the ordinance, so thanks for all your time.
Thank you.
Anyone else have anything to comment on this item for the evening? Okay, we will look forward to what you're going to bring back with us and some of the answers to all of the things that came up this evening. With that being said, we will move on to other business. I think it's updated on prior cases. And before you start, Eric, if there's anyone in the audience that wants to leave, we don't blame you.
Yeah.
Besides you. Besides you. You have to stay.
Just very quickly, like to update the Planning and Zoning Commission. It's just a matter of practice anymore. Thank you, Mr. Vaughn. And
Just so you know, my mom was watching television and she saw you talk about this, and she was like, "Good job, Dale." Good job. I said, "Yeah, well,
excellent.
trying to make a change here."
It is something that needs to be done, and so apologize if we've not done a more thorough job of that in the past. But first up on the list, the endorsement of the Southside Old Munich Plan by the City Council was actually held up by the Law Department. There's a bit of an issue with how Missouri state statute deals with comprehensive plan amendments and how our code, the zoning code, deals with comprehensive plan amendments. And it was a large enough red flag that the Law Department staff felt that needed to have a little bit more review in there, and so that is currently in their hands. And beyond that, I'd probably refer you to the Law Department if you're looking for any more information in that regard. The second item is and dang it, I didn't put the address of it up there, on Veith Drive, the daycare and skilled nursing facility final PUD plan. Now, it was passed through this body as a preliminary plan, and then by the City Council, and then took the rare action of actually taking that final PUD plan to the City Council, bypassing planning and zoning. But that was approved by the City Council, and so that project has received its final zoning approval, so to speak. And that's all I've got.
Okay, thank you.
Oh.
Any comments? Go ahead.
So, Sylvia Dolores Barron was born 1 week ago, 8 pounds 1 ounce, 21 inches, doing healthy. Mom's doing healthy. Everyone's happy,
That is
including Big Brother. He's
that's number two.
that's number
correct?
2. So yes.
At this point, no one's concerned about how Dad's doing, so just get used to it.
No, I found that when the nurse walks into the hospital room and says, "How's everyone doing?" they don't care about Dad. And if you answer them, they'll look at you like, "Why are you here?"
You got a lot of years to look forward to that same answer.
Go do something.
I do know that you gentlemen provided us this. Is there any comments on that?
Yes, if I could have Mr. Rotenberry address that.
Thank you very much. So the city recently has applied for a designation called a bicycle-friendly community, which is administered by the League of American Bicyclists. I was a part of that process of putting a rather lengthy application together. I will say that the city of Jefferson, as a business, was recently awarded the equivalent for businesses called a bicycle-friendly business. They have different designations going from bronze to diamond, and the city was awarded a bronze designation. So we were extremely proud of that achievement. So we're doing the same thing, but this is for a citywide application. It was quite a lengthy experience looking at different aspects of the community. They call them the 5 E's. So there was things like enforcement, and evaluation and planning, engineering, and so we worked with a number of people both within the city and nonprofits and other persons outside the city to put this application together. We've completed that and turned that in mid-August. And in the past, what they had done, because the MPO, the Metropolitan Planning Organization, had done one for their region. Before, what they had done is they had just asked someone local, in this case it was someone from St. Louis, to evaluate our application. They've changed that process, and instead of doing that, now they have an online survey which anybody can take, and they gave us the link and just said, go. And so I've been going to different committees. I mean, I just happen to sit on this one now. But I've been going to various committees and commissions that the city has been and kind of giving them either the sheet, such as the one that I gave you, or just a little spiel on this survey. It's a short survey, and they're just interested in kind of like how bicycle friendly this community is. I'm just asking folks to fill that out if you have an opportunity. I emailed them today, and we've received over 150 filled surveys so far, and so I think that's great. I'm very happy with that number, but of course it closes on the 30th, so I think we can do better. So I'm hoping that you will take those yourselves, and I hope that you will, if you're interested, kind of pass that along to your family and friends so they might take it as well.
So we we get extra credit points, as I understand it, for the number of surveys that are filled out by our community.
That may be true. I think it helps them figure out, I mean, so, we answered all these questions, and it was, like I said, it was a detailed and very thorough application. But I think, they get a more rounded picture when they get all these survey results from residents and people that visit the city. I mean, I'm not necessarily thinking that people that live in the city are the only ones that can take this. So I think people that work in the city certainly, or come to the city for recreational purposes, or for shopping reasons or whatever, that there's no reason they couldn't take it either. So we're just trying to round out the application, I guess, with this survey, and so I'm just hoping that you all will take some time to fill it out for us.
Great. Well, thanks for coming tonight and giving us that, and it's good work on your all's part to do that for the city. Do any of the other commission members have any comments? If not, we will consider this adjourned. Thank you for everyone coming tonight.